All right, everybody. You want to come on back together? If you don't have an outline, study notes for tonight, they're in the back. It's the one titled Jeremiah Cleanses the Temple. And we are picking up about halfway through that one. So we will be in the book of Jeremiah tonight, picking up in chapter 9. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. So, by way of review, because I know it's been a little while, this section, Jeremiah chapters 7 through 10, are a big sermon that Jeremiah preached. And he might have done this over the course of a couple of days, but it all fits together as a big sermon that he preached. In fact, almost all of the book of Jeremiah is a record of his sermons, his preaching. And do you guys remember how this sermon started? Or you could even look, if you want, at the first verses of chapter 7. Where does Jeremiah go to preach this sermon? Yep, the gateway to the Lord's house. This is Jeremiah going to the temple. So Jerusalem is on the eve of invasion. The Babylonians are getting ready to come screaming down from the north. The whole country is given over to idolatry. They're following false gods. There are a lot of false prophets in the country. And do you guys remember, what are the false prophets saying? What are the false prophets telling the country? They're saying, peace, peace. It's okay. Everything's going to be okay. Everything is not going to be okay. Jeremiah is one of the few true prophets. And you can tell he's a real prophet because nobody likes him. He's not telling anybody what they want to hear. He's telling the truth. All the false prophets are telling what everybody wants to hear. Jeremiah is telling the truth. And so God sends Jeremiah to the temple in chapter 7, verse 2. Stand in the gate of the Lord's house and proclaim there this word. And that begins this sermon that goes on for 4 chapters. And the first part of the sermon, chapter 7, and the first couple of verses of chapter 8, we see how God hates hypocrisy. And then in chapter 8, for the rest of the chapter, we see how God hates lying. And those two things, hypocrisy and lying, are one of the reasons that God is going to send the Babylonians to destroy Jerusalem and bring the people into captivity. So it's safe to say that hypocrisy is bad. We shouldn't be hypocrites and we shouldn't be liars. And I think we all know what a liar is, right? We all get the idea of what lying is. But what's hypocrisy? What is hypocrisy? Yeah, 2 people at the same time. Think about an actor with a mask, inside versus outside. If there's something Jesus hates, it's hypocrisy. That's a strong statement, but we can make it from the Bible. Jesus hates hypocrisy. He preaches against hypocrisy powerfully. If Jesus ever preaches hellfire and damnation, it's against hypocrisy. Jesus hates it when people are one person on the outside and another person on the inside. So we see that Jeremiah is preaching against lies and he's preaching against hypocrisy. And now we're going to pick up tonight in chapter 9. And as we do that, let's ask the Lord's blessing. God, thank you. Thank you for the prophet Jeremiah. Lord, he lived a hard life, a life full of weeping and sorrow. And nevertheless, you use him. Jesus, now work in our lives. We are all going through sorrows. Some of us great, some of them small. Lord, take these sorrows and turn them to wisdom. Help us to see how we can grow even through trial and hardship, even through pain and suffering. Jesus, help us to live pure and content and holy lives before you. Help us to hear from your word tonight how you would have us to follow you. God, I don't have the ability in myself to preach this rightly or to teach it. Indeed, we cannot, but for your help and your grace, understand your holy word. And so, Jesus, help us to be submissive to you, to receive your teaching tonight, to act on it, and be changed by the Holy Spirit. We look to you and your grace. We pray this in your name. Amen. And as always, the hope is that this is a discussion as we're working through these chapters in Jeremiah. I'd love to hear what you guys think or what questions you have. And so let's pick up in chapter 9. This is continuing the sermon that started in the temple. There's an invitation, a really powerful invitation at the end of this chapter. Jeremiah's preaching is a lot like modern day preaching. Usually you have introduction. A lot of times you have object lessons or illustrations. We'll see that next time. And usually these preaching sections end with some kind of invitation, some kind of so what. And that's important. We always want to remember the so what. Even as we're going through this, we want to remember the so what. So Jeremiah considers the destruction that's about to come on Jerusalem, and look at his response. Would somebody read for us Jeremiah 9, 1 through 3? Excuse me. Yeah, let's do that. Jeremiah 9, 1 through 3. Yeah, so he is the weeping prophet. And this is an important thing to point out. Jeremiah is full of crying. Jeremiah cries and cries and cries. And we see that crying, that this kind of sorrow is part of a legitimate human experience. This is part of life. It's appropriate. It's healthy. It's the right response. Why is Jeremiah sad? What's he crying about? Yeah, because of their lies, and also for the suffering that's about to happen too. The slaying of the daughter of my people. It's like he can't cry enough. Like he can't get all of his sorrow out. He's like a fountain that just gushes forth sorrow and sorrow. And he's grieved for his people, but he's also disgusted with his people. What is he requesting in verse 2? He wants to go out into the wilderness. He doesn't want to see them anymore. He's absolutely taken with grief, but he's also disgusted with them. And he just wants to go and be alone and cry. And that's his heart. They're called adulterers, and we've seen already many times in Jeremiah, adultery is a picture of people being unfaithful to God. So when people follow false gods, it's like they're being unfaithful to the true God. In the same way an adulterous spouse would be unfaithful. And they're also treacherous. They deceive each other, they betray each other, they don't keep faith. They're not valiant for the truth. They bend their tongues like bows to sling lies. They're a nation of deceit. And at the end of the day, that's why they're going to be judged, because of deceit. All of the sorrow is coming upon them because they love lies and not truth. And so I said we need to be mindful of the so what. We look at this and this fountain of sorrow in the desert because of people that love lies rather than truth. What's the so what for us? What should we take from that? That simple fact that lying leads to sorrow. What do you guys think? It doesn't have to be complicated. How about just love the truth, right? Like cling to the truth. Even if you think that a little lie might smooth things over just a little bit and make things a little easier and a little less embarrassing, we see that the end of even little lies, will lead you to this place where you're like this fountain of sorrow in the desert, alone and weeping uncontrollably. They can't be trusted. In verse 4, take ye heed every one of his neighbor. Trust ye not in any brother, for every brother will utterly supplant, and every neighbor will walk with slanderers. They're constantly at each other's throats. They're not peaceable amongst each other. And this is another point, another kind of takeaway. Do you want to have peace in a family, in a group, in an organization? Do you want to have trust? You have to be trustworthy. If you use little lies to try and smooth things over, they're going to grow into bigger lies, and nobody's going to trust each other. So they deceive each other in verse 5. They will deceive everyone as neighbor. They will not speak the truth. They live in a nation of deceit in verse 6. Their habitation is in the midst of deceit. Through deceit they refuse to know me, saith the Lord. And that's a really powerful statement. They're lying. What do you guys think they're lying about? What have we seen in Jeremiah? Do you remember? I know it's been a couple weeks, but what kinds of, people back then are not different than people today. What kinds of things do you think they're lying about? Yeah, business deals. Just a little. You get the scale. You're going to buy some sheep, and you get the scale out, and maybe you know that the scale isn't quite right, but it's probably that guy's taking advantage of you at some point. So you just make sure the scale is pointed in the right direction. So they're lying in business. What else? What other kinds of things? What kinds of things are we tempted to lie about? What are we tempted to lie about? Taxes, yeah, more business deals. Have you ever forgotten something or failed at something and you were tempted to cover it up just a little bit? The little lies lead to big lies, and people can't trust each other, and the whole society collapses. That's what we see. And ultimately, they refuse to know me, saith the Lord. You're going to have to choose between lies and God. You cannot have lies and God in your life. One or the other. You're going to have to choose. And so we see God's judgment through verse 9. He's going, thus saith the Lord of hosts, and that should perk our ears up. What does the Lord of hosts mean? Does it mean God's really good at hospitality? He is good at hospitality. That's not what it means. What is the Lord of hosts? Say again. Yeah. Yes, Mark points it out. That's how it's translated, as it were, in James. The Lord of Sabaoth, the Lord of armies. So when you read Lord of hosts, you should be thinking the one who leads armies of angels. The Lord of hosts. Behold, I will melt them. I will try them. How shall I do for the daughter of my people? Their tongue is as an arrow that shoots out. It speaks deceit. One speaks peace to his neighbor with his mouth, but in his heart he lies in wait. And so the Lord of hosts is going to visit them. And then as we go through the next 12 verses, 5 times in rapid succession, God pronounces sorrow over Israel. And he gives lamentation. In verse 13, the Lord says, because they have forsaken my law, which I set before them, they have not obeyed my voice, and neither walked therein, but have walked after the imagination of their hearts, after the Baalim which their fathers taught them. In verse 15, therefore thus saith the Lord of hosts. Notice that God of armies language again. The God of Israel, behold, I will feed them, even this people, with wormwood, and give them water of gall to drink. Their life is going to become bitter. Proverbs tells us that stolen bread is sweet, but in the end your mouth will be full of gravel. The lies feel good right now, but in the end they are going to be bitter. Their life is going to be full of bitterness. In verse 17, thus saith the Lord of hosts, notice that armies language again, consider ye, call for the mourning women that they may come. Send the cunning or the skillful women that they may come. Let them make haste and take up a wailing for us, that our eyes might run down with tears and our eyelids gush out with water. God is calling Israel to lament and mourn for their spiritual condition, and if they don't change, soon they're going to be mourning for their physical condition too. Mourning and lamentation is an appropriate part of life. It is appropriate to be sad sometimes, especially if it's being sad over what you've done so that you can do better. We see more of this mourning and lamentation in verse 20. Yet hear the word of the Lord, O ye women. Let your ears receive the word of his mouth, and teach your daughters wailing. Let every one her neighbor lamentation. In their culture, they really made an art of mourning. If you've ever seen like a Middle Eastern funeral, you might actually see this still. They really have made an art of mourning and sorrow. You will pay people to come to your funeral to make a big deal about your death. It's an art. And this is what God is telling them to do. You guys should be mourning. You should be sorrowful. Why should they be mourning? Why should they be sorrowful? Yeah, they have absolutely no hope. They've departed from the one who can give them, the one in whom all their hope resides, God, and so they should be sorrowful. It is appropriate to be sad. When you've done bad things and you've departed from God, sadness and coming back to God is the right emotional response. They should be sorrowful. Speak, in verse 22. Speak, thus saith the Lord, even the carcass of the men shall fall as dung upon the open field, and as the handful after the harvestmen, and none shall gather them. The picture is really grisly. It's these people are going to fall down dead in the wars, and they're just going to rot where they lay, and nobody's going to bury them. This is sad. And this ultimately has come upon Israel because they loved lies and other things besides God. And we must learn this lesson. If you follow anything other than God in your life, this is how it's going to end up for you. And so here we have the powerful invitation. Would somebody read for us verses 23 through 24? Jeremiah 9, 23 through 24.
Not the wise man glory in his wisdom, neither let the mighty man glory in his might. Let not the rich man glory in his riches, but let him that glorieth glory in this, that he understandeth and knoweth me, that I am the Lord, which exercise loving kindness, judgment, and righteousness in the earth. For in these things I delight, saith the Lord.
All right. So this is really where it's at. This is one of the heartbeats of Jeremiah right here. Again, people don't change. People are basically the same at all times. And just like today, if you're really smart, or at least you think you're really smart, you might be tempted to feel good about yourself and to be proud of that and really rest in that and trust in your smarts. Just like in past times, that's how people were. Or some people might be really strong. Might here is either physical strength or like military strength. Some people might walk in and they're obviously the strongest guy in the room and they could beat up everybody. And you might be tempted to be really proud of that and feel really good about yourself. Or some people are really rich, huge amounts of money. And they are tempted to get a good night's sleep because they know they'll always have money. They'll always be able to pay for it. And God is saying you should not glory in any of those things. You shouldn't trust any of those things. You shouldn't trust your smarts. You shouldn't trust your strength. You shouldn't trust your money. What is it that we should trust? Yeah, we should trust God. And we should feel good, not about being smart or rich or powerful, but we should feel good about what? What should make us feel good in life? Yeah, our relationship with God, right? Do you see how he describes it? The one who knows or understands and knows. Two different words, related, but they have a little bit different meanings. Understanding here is having profitable insight. It's knowledge put to good use. Understanding is knowing that God doesn't change, is knowing that God is always good, is knowing that God hates lies. That's understanding. Knowing things about God. The knowledge here, the knowing, is kind of confusing because we use the same word in different ways in English, but the knowing here speaks of something else. The knowing is a personal relationship. Like the way a person knows their spouse, or the way that you know your best friend. Like you just know them. Like you know what they're thinking. Like the way a parent might know their kids, and you can kind of look into the future a little bit and see how you think how your kids are going to behave when they realize this or when they see that. You know them. You know them as a person. And this is what God is saying. He's saying, don't get caught up in your money or your smarts or your strength. Be excited about knowing me and understanding me. Anthony? Yeah. 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 No, I think you're right, and we lie to our others and ourselves about that. we're not honest about just how messed up things are sometimes. Because God is truth, because God lives in truth and loves truth, and God cannot lie, whenever you follow lies, whenever you tell lies, whenever you trust in lies, in some way you are splitting yourself from God. And so to the extent that you go after lies, you cannot know God. Not in the way it's talked about here. This is not just head knowledge of God, this is heart knowledge of God. This is knowing God as a person. You have to choose between lies and knowing God. And that starts with being honest before God about how you are. And with each other. How does the verse in Galatians go? Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Jesus has called us to bear each other's burdens. Now when somebody asks you, how are you doing? If you say, oh, I'm okay, does that make you a liar? I don't know. When somebody asks how are you doing at the store, do they really want to know? But when somebody asks in your church family, you should be honest. You should be truthful. Unless the service is about to start, and then you just say, well, I'll talk to you later. And I want you to notice that, so let the person, you want to know what to feel good about in life, you want to know what's really important, you glory in that you know and understand God, and specifically that I am the Lord. And this is a profound thing, but God uses his covenant name here, his great name, I am. When Moses was before God, and God said to Moses, I'm going to send you to Pharaoh, Moses said, well, look, they're going to ask who you are. Because we live in a world of gods. Egypt has thousands of gods. And Pharaoh's going to say, what's the name of this God that I should listen to him? And God said, tell Pharaoh, I am that I am. And the idea here is God always is. He's always faithful. He's always reliable. He's always true. He's always powerful. He's always right. He just is consistently throughout time. And here he uses that. Very often when God makes promises, he seals it with this name, I am. And so sometimes we call it God's covenant name. It's like he's signing. It's like his signature. When he makes a promise, he says his name, and it's his signature on that promise. It's his covenant name. And so he's inviting people to know him personally himself. What should you really be excited about? What should you feel good about? What really matters in life? That you know and that you understand God as he truly is. I am the one who is faithful, the one that is true. And then he reveals some things about himself. What is God like? What does God value? What do you guys see? What do we see here that God values? Loyal love. That's a good start. In the King James, it's translated loving kindness. That's not a bad translation either. The Hebrew word is hesed, if you're interested in that at all. This is covenant mercy. This is keeping kindness. This is taking care of your family. This is Ruth. Ruth is like the picture of this loyal love. Everything she does for Naomi, she sticks with her, she helps her out. She's the picture of loyal love in the Old Testament. It's very close to what we call grace, but it's got more of an emphasis on faithfulness, on reliable compassion. And what should we be excited about in life? What should we really be thrilled about? The reliable compassion, the faithfulness of God. That's something that should excite us. And then what's another thing that we see about God? What else does God value? Judgment. Judgment. And when we read judgment in the King James, especially in the Old Testament, we should be thinking justice. The way that we treat each other, which is interesting because Jeremiah is full of God complaining about Israel cheating each other. You guys always cheat each other. You cheat each other at business. You cheat each other in your relationships. You're always lying to each other. Nobody can trust each other. God is saying, I love justice. I love it when people are fair and square and upright, when they're transparent in their dealings. That's something that God loves. And then what's the third thing? The third thing that God delights in? Yeah, right. Yeah, righteousness. So if justice is how we treat each other, how we relate to each other, we don't lie to each other, we don't steal from each other, righteousness is how we relate to God. It's our personal holiness, the holiness of our inner life, our love and our worship of God. These are the things that God really values. And so one of the big takeaways, one of the big so what's in your life is that when you are looking at your bank account, and maybe your bank account's nothing to boast of, but when you're looking at your bank account or you're thinking about how smart you think you are, or how physically attractive you think you are, or how strong you think you are, if you're resting in any of those things, if those are the things that get you excited, to some extent, you're not being honest. You're not really being truthful. But if you get excited about God, about knowing Him as He is, the covenant God, the God of faithfulness, about the things that He's excited about, faithful compassion, justice and righteousness or holiness, that is actually something to be excited about. That's something to feel good about. And then, if you really latch onto those things, then you won't be the fountain of sorrow in the desert that just wants to go be by yourself and cry. Now, so far, this has been an invitation to Israel. But I want you to see what happens next in the chapter. It's pretty interesting. Would somebody read for us verses 25 and 26? Jeremiah 9, 25 and 26. Could be a man or a woman, anybody that would like to do it.
Days come, saith the Lord, that I will punish them punish all of them which are circumcised with the uncircumcised, Egypt and Judah and Edom and the children of Ammon and Moab and all that are the utmost sent corners that dwell in the wilderness, for all these nations are uncircumcised, and all the house of Israel are uncircumcised in heart.
Okay, so up till now, this has mostly been pointed to God's people. But now God is sort of expanding it. And He's pointing out this matters to you. I assume you're not Jewish, but this matters to everybody. Everybody is ultimately going to be judged by God. All of the nations, the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Egyptians, the Edomites, they're all going to be judged. And also Israel is going to be judged. Israel was tempted to trust in their circumcision. They were tempted to trust in their religion. And God is saying, I'm going to judge the uncircumcised, and I'm also going to judge you guys, because you are also uncircumcised in your heart. Not in your flesh, but in your heart. Because God hates hypocrisy. God hates it when the outside doesn't match the inside. And so if you're uncircumcised on the inside, you might as well be uncircumcised. And so this is an invitation to know God. And not only does it extend to Israel, but also to all the families of the earth. Because we're all going to be judged one day. Not just on the externals, but on the internals. So we should reject lies in our life. Know that if you learn to love lies even a little bit, but for God's grace, it's going to get bigger and bigger and grow out of control, and you will be taken by lies. We should learn to love God as He is. He is faithful. He is compassionate. He is just, and He is holy. We should get excited for Him about who He is. What are some other takeaways? Some other so what's in this passage? What do you guys see? Mark? Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It would have been shocking because they trusted in their ethnicity and in their religious system, and God is saying, hey, if the outside doesn't match the inside, that doesn't matter. And what do we as Americans trust in? What do you guys think as Americans? What do we tend to trust in more than anything? Yeah, I was thinking that too. Let not the rich man glory in his riches. Like we should think about with that. So Mark pointed out how shocking this would be to the Hebrews because they tended to trust in their ethnicity and in their religious system. Well, we tend to trust in our money, and we see that both are thrown down in this chapter. So let's say you're in a place where you know that you are trusting too much in money or smarts or beauty or whatever. What should we do? Because the answer is not, well, I just need to grit my teeth and be more righteous. That's legalism, and you might get a little better, but it's not going to be a change in the long run. What we see here is that if something is broken on the inside, we need to be changed on the inside. So who does the changing on the inside? Who does the spiritual operation on the inside? Paula? Yeah. Yeah. Create in me a clean heart, renew a right spirit within me. Sherry? Is that what you're going to say? Oh. That's honesty right there. Good job. Good illustration. That's honesty. This isn't about like, hey, you guys really stink. You need to do better. This is come to God and ask for His help. Ask for His mercy. We see that He loves compassion. Ask for Him to be compassionate and to teach you what really matters in life. Ask for His grace. And so the next chapter, chapter 10, and then we'll wrap up for the evening. This is Jeremiah's winding down his sermon here. He's coming to the end. This is like his conclusion. Hear ye the word which the Lord... So this is 10:1, Jeremiah 10:1. Hear ye the word which the Lord speaketh to you, O house of Israel. Thus saith the Lord, learn not the way of the heathen, nor be dismayed at the signs of heaven. For the heathen are dismayed at them. For the customs of the people are vain. One cutteth a tree out of the forest, and worketh of the hands of the workman with his axe. They deck it in silver and with gold. They fasten it with nails and with hammers, and move it not. They are upright as the palm tree, but speak not. They must needs be born, because they cannot go. Be not afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, neither is it in them to do good. So, God's telling Israel, don't learn the ways of the heathen. When he talks about the signs of the heavens, he's talking about what we would call astrology. Don't worry too much about that, God says. What's the other thing that's being described here? It does sound like a Christmas tree, doesn't it? I've had Christians tell me you should not have Christmas trees in your house because of this verse. And if you have convictions about Christmas trees, I'm not working real hard to talk you out of it, but what's being described here? An idol, yeah. They cut down a tree. They put gold on it. They work it. They carve it. They stick it up with nails somewhere so that it cannot move. And this is meant to be a little funny. This is meant to be ridiculous. This tree, people are afraid of this tree that you nailed to a wall. But you know what? That tree you nailed to the wall, it can't do any harm. And it can't do you any good either. God is saying, don't learn their ways. Don't be like them. The idols are powerless. But God is different. Remember, He said, don't glory in the things that do matter, glory in knowing God. And so now God talks about the things that don't matter, these dumb idols. Now He's going to talk about Himself. He reveals Himself, His own character in verses 6 through 9. God is great in verse 6. He's mighty. In verse 7, He's the King of nations. In verse 8, all the nations are like brutish and foolish. They're like animals. In verse 9, they basically work to make idols. Verse 9 describes working to make idols. Tarshish is probably Spain. It's the western extreme of their world. And the idea here is that gold is brought from the extreme places, and all this finery is brought in, and they use it to make these beautiful idols. But at the end of the day, it's just vain. It's only vanity. You can make your idol as beautiful as you want, but at the end of the day, it cannot help you. And probably you don't have an idol tree nailed to the side of your house, but we have our idols. We have our things that we build up, that we want to make as beautiful as we possibly can. And is that bad? The question is, why are you doing it? I give you some references so you can look it up, but God actually values beautiful things. I was talking with somebody about this because I grow a lot of flowers, and they were like, well, I think we should grow, this is not Heather, to be clear about that. They were like, well, I think you should grow useful things, like things you can eat. And my thought is, things that are beautiful are useful. They're useful in that they're beautiful. God made beauty to be enjoyed. But if our beautiful thing becomes our idol, if it becomes about that thing inappropriately, then it becomes out of bounds. And I give you some references in Exodus where God talks about making the tabernacle, where you can learn more about that. What we see here, wrapping up Jeremiah's sermon, is the difference between the vanities and the false gods and the true God. Like look in 10:11. Thus shall ye say to them, the gods that have not made the heaven and the earth, even they shall perish from earth and from under the heavens. The idols, the vanities, whatever it is we're tempted to trust in, it's all going to be destroyed. Has it made the heaven and earth? What's your thing that you trust in? Did it make heaven and earth? Did your grade at school, did what your friends think about you, did your bank account, did your hairdo, did your magnificent beard, whatever you trust in, did it make heaven and earth? No. That means when heaven and earth go, it's going to go too. But, in verse 12, he that hath made the earth by his power, he that established the world by his wisdom, and stretched out the heavens by his discretion. When he utters his voice, there is a multitude of waters in the heavens. He causes the vapors to ascend to the end of the earth. He makes lightning with rain. He brings forth the wind out of the treasure. This is a picture we see a lot in the Bible where the Bible writer basically says, go look at nature. Look at nature. And nature will teach you about God. Nature will teach you about the greatness of God. The false god's life is wrapped up in the world. But the true God goes beyond the world. He's the maker of all. And now he names himself some really interesting things. In verse 16, he's going to reveal things about himself. He's described in verse 16 as the portion of Jacob. Israel is described as his inheritance. He's described as the Lord of hosts. What do you think about this? What does it mean that God is the portion of Jacob? What does that mean? God is the portion of Jacob. In Jeremiah 10:16. What does it mean to be like the portion of something?
Jacob is the one that he loves, and Israel comes forth from Jacob.
Yeah.
So he's
Yeah. It's ultimately Jacob, God is Israel's inheritance. Remember how Jacob got his inheritance, sort of? He lied about it, which does not bode well, as we've talked about, but ultimately God is gracious. The picture we get here, Israel is described as the portion of Jacob. God is described as the portion of Jacob, and Israel is described as God's inheritance. The picture we get here is that God belongs to his people, and his people belong to him, like a married couple. That's how close they are to each other. And so the sermon ends very powerfully with these two songs, one of defeat and the other of lamentation. And these last words of chapter 10. In verse 24, O Lord, correct me, but with judgment, not in thine anger, lest thou bring me to nothing. Ultimately, we're being taught to look for God's correction, to look for his justice. And that means also his mercy. Does God ever correct you in your life? Does he ever steer you in a direction maybe you didn't want to go? That is an act of mercy. When he does that, that is an act of mercy. And so this cleansing of the temple that started at the beginning of this sermon, it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. We're actually going to see that next week. A lot of people got really mad about this sermon. But ultimately, this is an act of mercy. Sometimes the things we don't want to hear are merciful. And so this begins with Jeremiah preaching this message in the temple and then weeping over the city. And we should absolutely be thinking of Jesus here. We should be thinking of Jesus cleansing the temple and weeping over Jerusalem. We should learn to reject fake living and love sincerity. We should learn to reject falsehood and love honesty. We should learn to reject idols and love God. We should learn to reject pride and love mercy. That's what we see in this passage. And we are out of time. Next week, we are going to do... Next week, the IBCS ministry team is going to be here. And then the week after that, we're going to do the next 3 chapters, I believe. So if you want to read ahead, 3 chapters will get you as far as we're going next. But let's ask the Lord's blessing. God, thank you. Thank you for your mercy and truth. Thank you for revealing yourself to us. Jesus, teach us to be honest. Jesus, teach us to be the same on the outside as we are on the inside. By your mercy, correct us and guide us. When we sorrow, teach us to sorrow well and to turn the sadness of sin into wisdom and righteousness. And help us to get excited about you, who you are, and to trust in you. You are our portion and our shield. You are our song and our salvation. May you, God, be all in our lives. Bless us this week and send us as your ambassadors and witnesses into the world in your name. Amen.